Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for watching. Today's video is going to be a tutorial to show you how I made this Day of the Dead sugar skull inspired cake. So let's get right into it. I'm starting out with this skull pan that I purchased from Wilton. You can use any skull mold you have, or if you want to try etching out the details by hand instead of using a mold, you could try that as well. This is just a bit of a time saver for me. I'm taking some black fondant and I'm going to press that into my mold after I've lightly sprayed the whole thing with some vegetable oil. You want to make sure you're pressing fairly hard so that you're going to get all those details pressed into your fondant. It should come out of the mold fairly easily. It does look a bit gooey here, but I just patted away the excess with a paper towel, and once it dries, it tends to dry down matte anyway, so don't worry about it. Cut away any of the excess fondant around the sides of the skull, and it should look something vaguely like this. If any parts of the skull didn't get indented properly, I'm just going over that with my fondant tool and etching out the lines better. I wanted the eye sockets to be deeper than what the mold allowed, so just using my thumbs, I'm pressing those in, but I'm careful not to lose the shape and press out around the sides of my skull. I'm going to set my skull aside to firm up, and in the meantime I'm going to start mixing my colors that I'm going to use to paint the skull. I've got some white food coloring gel from Wilton and I'm going to use that as a base, and to 3 of those I'm going to mix in a darker pink, a medium tone pink, and a light pink. To start decorating my skull, I'm taking some shortening and rubbing that into the eye sockets. And then I have some silver disco dust that I'm just going to press in. You want to be careful not to kind of feather it around because then it'll get all over your skull. So just pack it in as much as you can. And then if there's any sparkles that kind of get loose all over the skull, then just take a Q-tip or a piece of paper towel and it should dab away pretty easily. I looked at a bunch of different reference photos for the design on my skull. You can really do anything, so I'm just kind of making up one as I go. Using the back of my paintbrush, I'm taking the lightest pink and just kind of dotting a pattern around each of the eye sockets. Next, I'm going to take some gold luster dust and mix it with some food grade alcohol, and then using a fine tipped paintbrush, I'm going to draw on a spider web pattern on the forehead. I'm going to continue those dots up the middle of the forehead and then along the border of my spider web. Taking my darkest shade of pink, I'm drawing some lines above the eyes. It took me quite a while to get these symmetrical. If you do make a mistake, they do wipe away fairly easily, so don't freak out. With more of that gold, I'm making like a scalloped pattern around each of those dots around the eye socket. I added some white little squiggly lines on the cheekbones, and then I also outlined the middle of the skull nose. Using some white, I outlined the teeth, and then I used some more of that dark pink to kind of make like a scalloped, almost like lipstick kind of design. I set that aside so that my paint could dry, and in the meantime, I'm going to start on my actual cake. I already have my 8-inch cake stacked up and covered in buttercream. If you need to see how to do that, you can check out some of my previous videos. I'm using a really light shade of pink for my fondant, and I'm rolling that out onto my cornstarched surface to about 1/8 of an inch thick, and I'm going to pick that up using my fondant roller and drape that over my cake. And then just using my hands and my fondant tool, I'm pushing all the air out from the top and then working my way down the sides, pulling out the skirt and smoothing it all the way down. Cut away any excess fondant at the bottom using a pizza cutter or a sharp knife, and then go over the sides and the top one more time with your fondant smoother. Before I add my skull to my cake, I'm going to start making my roses for the headpiece. And to do that, I'm using a light pink, a medium pink, and a dark pink, just like the shades I used to paint my skull. And I'm rolling each of those colors out really thinly. And you could use rose cutters if you have them, but I'm just using some circle cutters. And I'm cutting out a bunch of circles. And then using a foam pad and my balling tool, I'm going to start pressing so that half of the balling tool is on the edge of the petal and half of the balling tool is on the foam pad, and just working my way around the edges until they've thinned out and kind of crimped a bit. I used 3 different circle cutters to make my petals. I just used like the ends of piping tips, whatever I had, and I did that for all 3 shades. After all my petals were formed, I just set them aside for a moment and I added my skull to my cake. And to do that, I just used a wooden dowel, and then I also added some piping gel to the bottom of my skull for some extra stability. So to create my roses, you're going to start with a bud. I rolled out a ball of fondant into a teardrop shape, and then I just stuck that onto the end of a skewer. I'm not using floral wire for these because they won't be going into the cake, and I'm just going to end up taking them off the skewer when I'm done. So to that bud, I'm adding 1 petal, and I'm going to wrap that around the top and kind of pinch it down so that the tip of my bud is hidden. And then for the next layer, I'm going to use 3 petals. And when I attach them to my rosebud, I'm going to keep both sides open. I'm not going to press them against the rosebud. And I'm going to tuck the next petal into like the little joint where the other one's touching. So I'm not folding them in until all 3 are attached. And you can see I'm kind of just folding them over on one another. For my next layer, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm using that dark color again, and I'm going to add 5 petals. So I'm going to add my first petal, and then I'm going to tuck my next one into that joint, and then I'm going to do that all the way around and then close them. And you can keep this as open or as closed as you want. If you want to rearrange your petals so that it's a little more of an open rose, you can do that. And I basically just continuously did that. For my 3rd layer of petals, I used the medium shade of pink. And I did that for 2 layers, and then for the last layer I used the very light pink, so it had more of an ombre effect. I brushed the top of my skull with some water, and then I added 5 roses to the top. I made a slightly larger one for the middle, and then I just kind of worked my way out until I had a nice little crown of roses. I'm going to be adding some mini skulls to my cake, so to do that I have made a little template for myself, and I will link the one I used down below, and I am going to be cutting that out with some black fondant and an X-Acto knife. I've added that to my cake, and I'm creating this pattern you can see here where I'm just rolling out balls of fondant that are getting smaller and smaller and then pressing them against my cake, and then I'm adding that skull on the very end. Using some more of that white food coloring, I'm using my fine tip paintbrush, and I'm just drawing on some little skull faces. I created some larger black roses for the base of my cake, and I followed the exact same steps I used to make my pink roses. I'm pretty sure I had a brutal explanation of how to make these roses, so below I'm going to link a video that has a lot clearer instructions on how to make one. Mine were kind of cheat roses, but they worked out for what I needed them to do. I attached those using some piping gel, and then with a mix of that gold and the clear alcohol, I diluted it quite a lot, and I just kind of brushed over the entire rose so it gave it kind of a sheen. So this was the final result. I think this cake turned out super pretty. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed.